everyone. Thank you for joining us today, this morning. What a beautiful campus. Thank you so much for the invitation. I'm really excited to share my research in this context. This conference is so beautifully organized. I'm very happy. I showed up yesterday for a practice run, and everyone was so kind that I didn't feel like I'd made a mistake, so that's wonderful. So my current project, titled Potential Archives, Digital Feminist Methods and Relationality in the Artist Archive, emerges from my ongoing postdoctoral work exploring the complexities inherent to interdisciplinary artists' archives and potential digital and feminist approaches to reimagining archival forms. I've been working on this project now for about 2.5 years, and this is a new iteration where I'm going to be looking at the way that institutions have been archiving digital works that are quite complex. And so I'm starting sort of a new leg of the project. My presentation today contextualizes the project within current conversations about archives that combine archival studies, an area of studies situated in information science, and feminist digital humanities, a field that foregrounds the entanglements between technology, information, power, and positionality. Archives and archival studies are being reimagined in these areas according to shifting conditions and understandings related to how collections are institutionally situated, embedded, and embodied, to use feminist philosopher Rosie Bradotti's terms from Nomadic Subjects. First, I'll discuss some current issues in archives more broadly, and will relate this information to the study of artists' archives. After setting the stage, I will then speculate on how artists' archives might be reimagined and reconfigured in the context of these changing attitudes, looking to key digital projects and to digital art for possible solutions. As digital media conservators and digital art historians, Dina Engel and Glenn Wharton identify in the premise for their Artist Archive Initiative at New York University, conventional approaches to the artist archive neglect to study how the complexity of an artist's interdisciplinary creative practice can confound conventional archival systems and practices. My project demonstrates how artists' archives benefit from non-traditional archival methods that combine emerging digital archival strategies that accommodate and represent community, networks, and collaborations, with the intervention of the artists themselves in the co-creation of accessible multimedia archives. Digital methods enable artists to augment and customize their archival holdings with attributes such as narratives and narration and networked information. As an ironic aside, I'm studying some older archives to sort of glean information, and whenever I say this, I think most of the artists that I'm actually studying are dead, and so therefore can't really co-create their archives, but that's my ideal form in the end, is the co-creation of the archives with the artists. Today, I explore two related ideas: why a transformation of the organization of artists' archives is timely and important, and how more equitable and nuanced digital methods and platforms have the potential to benefit artists, scholars of art history, arts archivists, museum educators and curators, and broader publics. Building on earlier analyses in a recently published Sound Studies article on researching in the Lisa Robertson Fonds at Simon Fraser University in Burnaby, British Columbia, and a forthcoming article on Adrian Piper's Multiplicitous Archives, this project asks if a feminist reimagining of digital technology might provide an innovative theoretical and practical framework for transforming artists' archives, using and expanding upon strategies already employed in the preservation of digital artworks. Moreover, it asks if such a reimagining can begin to dismantle and replace the imperialist, colonialist systems that structure current knowledge regimes in museums and art history to generate more equitable and dynamic methods. Archival scholars have identified two interrelated contentions underlying current approaches to artists' archives within the present academic and archival milieu: systemic issues fundamental to archival conventions and practices, and shortcomings of formal organizational strategies within such practices. Before outlining these issues, I wish to note how they are predominantly interconnected with the tenets of data feminism, as outlined in this infographic created by Catherine D'Ignazio, Lauren Klein, and Marcia Diaz, and inspired by D'Ignazio and Klein's book of the same name, which I highly recommend as an entry point if you're curious about feminist digital humanities. It's a beautiful book. It's very accessible but rich, and whenever people ask for a critical digital humanities feminist bibliography, I point to their bibliography as a good starting point. Data feminism concerns itself with issues of power and positionality in data, systems, and technologies, including those which are implicated in archives and archival traditions. Feminist archival scholars, Michelle Caswell, Marika Seafor, and Stacey Wood, and Seafor and Caswell have been mentioned already, argue that traditional archival practice is often rooted in colonial and patriarchal culture and structural conditions. Engel and Wharton at NYU have addressed how the limitations of conventional archival systems often fail to accommodate the kinds of information, accuracy, and logistical affordances scholars and art professionals require for their research, observing how hierarchies can disrupt the transmission of certain forms of knowledge. Feminist scholars of the archive respond to such organizational shortcomings, observing how the practice of the co-creation of archives with the artists represented within the collections can contribute meaningfully to the value of the collection for scholars and communities. Caswell and Seafor propose a feminist ethical framework for archival studies that situates the archive socially and culturally, with consideration of relational and affective contexts. The addition of autobiographical, narrative, and network data and digital media forms enable increased access and have the potential to transform the relationships between artist, archival institution, and user. Returning to my core questions, first, why is a transformation of the organization of artists' archives timely and important? We might first defect to the conversations taking place in academic communities, examining the state of archival studies that have inspired the recent archival turn. The second or third wave of the archival turn, I should say. Certainly looking at and scrutinizing the lives of others is a demanding undertaking, and more attention is being paid to this in the current multivalent and interdisciplinary form of archival studies. Methods and approaches are being attentively revised such that the field, as it were, is undergoing a radical transformation. Michelle Caswell has famously declared that the field of archive studies is on fire in the introduction to her 2021 book, Urgent Archives, Enacting Liberatory Memory Work, attesting to the revisions and evolutions to the field undertaken by contemporary scholars of information, sciences, and the humanities. Caswell describes these changes to the field, this recent burst of energy and insight, encompassing various and sometimes conflicting methods, theories, and aims as critical archival studies. Though here she alludes more specifically to what she calls liberatory memory work in the archives, she also gestures to the broader ways archival studies have been shifting to acknowledge and ground themselves in the humanity of their subjects and the various subjectivities of these groups and or individuals implicated in memory work. These attributes underlie the general complexity of archival work and the material aspects of the archives. I can sense such shifts in my own perceptions of the materials I encounter in my archival research, such as in my work with the Joyce Wieland Fonds at the Clara Thomas Archive at York University, where I'm conscious of how materials such as Wieland's private notes and drawings stimulate feelings, how the ethical parameters of this work have real-world effects, and these factors shape my approach to my research, while also asking me to be aware of my own social and critical positionality within my work. It was while undertaking this work with Wieland's archive and in the Joe Spence Fonds at the Tate Archives in London that I recall how literary scholar Linda Mora describes the transformation of archival studies in the introduction to Moving Archives, where she observes how a researcher's critical positioning in relation to archival materials and understanding the implications, ethical and otherwise, of the affective dynamic that is deployed for this purpose has become paramount. While these shifts also signal an interest in the effects of archives on the archival scholar or user, the lived realities of the subjects, along with their individual and collective bodies and voices, are also of primary interest. The ways that these aspects of individual and collective subjecthood, especially within historically marginalized populations and communities, has been previously overlooked or obfuscated in archival studies and in archival conventions, and this itself is under particular scrutiny. It is important then to ask, if these attributes have been collectively kept apart from or out of or made secondary in archival studies for so long, how has this affected the ways that subjects are framed in and by the archive and its systems, conventions, and attitudes, even as archival studies, ever on fire, adapts to changing sociocultural conditions? As a starting point to exploring the meaning of the archive in a contemporary context, I posed a selection of questions borrowed from the Engendering Archives Research Group at the Center for the Study of Social Difference at Columbia University in New York, directed by scholars Tina Kemp, Sadia Hartman, Marianne Hirsch, Jane Howard, and Laura Wexler. These questions seem basic, but are, to me, an excellent starting point. What is an archive? Who or what authorizes its construction? How do archives contribute to the production of social and cultural difference? How does the development of new media, and here they mean digital platforms and other technological interventions, radically change the way that knowledge is classified, stored, and retrieved? Here I'll take a moment to share some dominant definitions of archives that are also worth considering. There's Derrida, Foucault, UC Polyck, who's speaking on Wolfgang Ernst, and note that these orthodox Eurocentric definitions are largely derived from the work of white male scholars. I'll assume that most listeners might be at least passingly familiar with these, which is probably not the best assumption, as together they form a kind of canon within humanistic archival inquiry. Based on these findings, it is clear that the archive, as both an institutionalized system and a set of ideas and material objects, offers a rich entry point for exploring and subverting the mechanisms of institutionalization premised in the philosophical and critical theoretical underpinnings of archival ideation and theory. Adding to this, the reconsideration of material and organizational aspects of artist fonds, or fonds, the collections in the archive, has immediate and practical consequences for institutions. Often collections are broken up and/or the acquisition process can be delayed by technical and policy-driven challenges. Institutions often have to turn away archives that are being donated because of all these problems. It's a huge cultural loss, especially for community archives, and when a community wants the archive to be housed in an institution, but the institution can't support the uptake of the collection. This is underlined by external factors, including national funding programs, which add further incentive to the demand for fundamental procedural change, though such incentivization requires critical analysis and historical contextualization. To begin to answer some of my research questions about how artists' archives might be reconceived according to feminist and digital methods, Potential Archives takes inspiration from extant digital archival projects in North America and Europe. These include, and the UK. These include the aforementioned Artists' Archive Initiative and the Family Camera Network. The Artists' Archive Initiative is a large-scale multi-institution project comprised of a large team and a robust infrastructure. The project schematics decenter the artist as a primary author and emphasize relationships between the artist, other people, artworks, places, and research sources. Sorry for this milk run. The Family Camera Network is not necessarily an artist archive, but demonstrates participatory mutual methods for the co-construction of collections. Again, it is a large-scale multi-institution project. This one is in Canada, in Toronto. It's collaborative and team-based, combining a steering team, collecting team, digital archive team, collaborators, and partners, many of whom are international. Its chief aim is to develop a public archive of family photographs and stories, including recorded interviews with narrators, combining queered methods from oral history and visual studies, and attempts to capture the thick histories and private networks of information in the collection. My most recent findings, and this seems much more exotic when I'm giving this talk in Canada, those I want to highlight in this presentation emerge in part from research I recently undertook at the Tate while I was a visiting scholar at Chelsea College of Art and Design, University of the Arts London, in spring 2022. The Tate is a leading international institution in the collection and preservation of digital artworks, as well as a center for research in innovative archival strategies for their extant collections. I met with scholar Patricia Falcao. That's her headshot that she sent me. A feminist technology scholar specializing in time-based media preservation and a member of Tate's acquisitions and conservation team, who I would later invite to speak as part of the York University Art History Speaker Series I was programming, and whose talk was of great interest to digital art student community, the communities at York. At Tate, we discussed the evolving ways that institutions approach complex media artworks. Falcao shared with me the multi-pronged conservation approaches the institution has adopted to answer to the complex requirements of works that might use or be built from ephemeral or obsolete media. This approach includes steps that are often unique to each artwork and that require careful documentation and consideration for issues such as legacy and futurity. Unsurprisingly, one of the issues Falcao foregrounds in her work at the Tate is that of scalability, given the demands of preservation strategies for these artworks and the increased uptake of these artworks as digital art becomes more mainstream. The labor demands for acquiring digital artworks are notably different from those of more conventional works, so acquisition systems are being redeveloped to accommodate these needs. Tate's approaches and struggles call to mind in quite a direct way some of the challenges of reimagining artists' archives and the ways that address the fundamental shifts called for in feminist archival studies. So how can we begin to make real change in the artist's archive? Learning from these projects and initiatives, I examine the ways that digital methods and open access technologies will enable artists and institutions, sorry, I'm getting ahead of myself, to augment and customize their archival holdings with attributes such as narratives and narration and networked information, while working towards long-term preservation and accessibility. Following the conclusions of digital humanities scholar Lozana Rosanova and digital art history scholar Karen DeFranco, demonstrating how the affordances of linked open data have the capacity to make visible collection items that do not fit standard categorization, I argue that the solution to reimagining the artist's archive implicates knowledge gleaned from working with digital art in open access legacy contexts. And here is where I also mention that excellent large-scale projects such as Susan Brown, Kim Martin, and Deb Stacey's collaborative International Links project are already leading the way in demonstrating the affordances of linked open data in cultural heritage contexts. So proof of concept exists in many institutions already. For more information, speak to my friend and colleague, Erin Canning from Oxford, who joins us today, who was part of the Links team. Might the organizational strategies, here we go, that's linked open data, just an image that, and then this is the Links project. Might the organizational strategies and technological innovations developed for dealing with digital artworks be effectively translated as a means to addressing what is currently left out of artists' archives? Can we use the semantic web to enable collaboration in the construction of artists' archives? It is my hope that my findings and the conversations I foster between artists, scholars, archivists, and digital media specialists will generate new approaches and methods in relation to current shortcomings. My project responds to a growing need to make collections management more equitable and accessible while also considering the contemporary implications of archival praxis. Further, I contend that reimagining the systems and strategies of the artist's archive according to a relational conceptual architecture inspired by the area of feminist materialist informatics will contribute to the development of a methodology for the theoretical and organizational renovation of archival modalities to address some of these shortcomings. Some of the main terms and ideas that contribute to this emerging conceptual architecture, which I hope to expand, are Kate Hale's informatics, or her use of informatics, which she defines as technologies of information as well as the biological, social, linguistic, and cultural change that initiate, accompany, and complicate their development, and as a network of complex relations. That's from How We Became Posthuman. That's on one page. Modal logics, which Felicity Coleman explicates as providing means to organize information and to think and act in response to abstract concepts and real conditions. Extra-materialism, which Elizabeth Gross describes as the inherence of ideality, conceptuality, meaning, or orientation that persists in relation to and within materiality as its immaterial or incorporeal conditions. And here I'm at my last paragraph. Thinking through the archive according to these terms and ideas points to an alternate archival future, or at least a revised archival logic, premised in relational, extra-material modal logics that take into account the complexity of archival holdings as they relate to the lived experiences and entanglements represented in the archive. This alternate and revised way of thinking through the archive will innovate and have lasting impact on the ways that archival materials are understood and taken up by institutions, including museums, galleries, and universities. Technological affordances aside, I wish to ask if by recasting artists' archives according to concepts and organizational logics derived from feminist digital humanities and feminist materialist informatics, can we enable institutions to reimagine archival formats and methods to accommodate the inherent complexity of the artist archive? The artist's archive needs to be reconsidered to accommodate these extra-material aspects of the archive and to account for the evolution and transformations of informatics and of archives and cultural heritage collections that current technologies elide. Thank you kindly for your attention, to the organizers for putting together this compelling series of panels, and to the Full Stack Feminism team for all of their hard work. And I am happy to answer any questions.